I'm Lena Yost. I'm a reporter with the Chronicle Telegram, and we are here today with a professor and Dr. Kestler with Lorain County Community College, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the coronavirus. Dr. Kestler, tell me a little bit about who you are, what you study, and what makes you an expert on viruses.
I have been studying, well, let me tell you about my background. I started working on viruses 35 years ago, and that was on HIV. I started at Harvard Medical School, spent a few years there, left Harvard, came to the Cleveland Clinic, worked for the Cleveland Clinic till 1991, and I've been here ever since at the college. For 23 years, I've been working at the clinic, and at Harvard, I worked on vaccines for HIV and AIDS disease. Here I work on vaccines for microbial ignorance. And so some of my subjects are in the room right now. Some of my students are here, and they're well vaccinated, I hope, in that subject. So I started working with, our virus is HIV. HIV is what we call a primate lentivirus. That is not this virus at all. But I watch everything. In 2012, there was a new virus called MERS. In 2003, there was a virus called SARS. Those two are coronaviruses. And then this one came out in January. In January, we started noticing that there were cases happening in China. And we quickly realized that there was a big deal going on. There was something going on in China. And I have been following that ever since. I've been tracking it daily and almost nerdly way. I have a class called Infectious Disease, A to Z. The name of it is Infectious Disease, A to Z, AIDS to Zika. And I have to tell you, we're kind of stuck on C. We've been stuck on C for the whole semester. We might just finish with C. Because it is a tremendous teaching tool. I have students helping tabulate data and put it all together so that we can have a reasonable picture of what's going on. I'm a numbers person. Tomorrow is a numbers holiday. Tomorrow is 3.14 day, so it's a number holiday. I find comfort in numbers. I know. Nerd. I find comfort in numbers, and it helps me to know what's going on by tracking these things. I can tell you a couple things by my studies of numbers. I can tell you that China has solved their problem. South Korea has solved their problem. North Korea, no idea, no knowledge. Italy is a disaster. I'm just going to put it that I have friends in Italy. I was in Italy a couple summers ago, and it's right now it's a problem. There are people who are in hospitals that are actually gymnasiums of high schools. Not the best situation. They have exceeded their healthcare capacity. There's a lot of misery. There are people suffering, not necessarily the people who have COVID. But there are people who, are having heart attacks and other kinds of things. They're not getting the medical care that they need. And they won't be officially scored on the disease statistics, but they were a side effect of this whole epidemic. And we're trying to keep that from happening. So that's what the governor did the other day. He shut down the schools. He shut down the colleges first, basically, and they all have, and by the way, across the country. He shut down the schools in Ohio, the K-12 schools in Ohio. I suspect there will be many other states. Right now, there's 5 states that are shut down in schools, and I think there will be more. And I think that was a good thing to do, because the whole idea here, what we're trying to do, is not have the surge of cases come all at once, because they're there. The cases are seated in America. If we close down the border now, it's kind of too late. Really, it's here. It's already embedded in the terrain, in the soil, or in the population, and we can go through it like this, a steep curve up and down. That's a lot of pain. What we're hoping to do is to spread those cases out and prolong them. That's the flattening the curve you've been hearing about in the last few days. If we can flatten the curve, we will be able to help more people with our current capacity. I mean, we have so many beds in hospitals in Northeast Ohio, and we're not going to get more. In China, by the way, on January 24th, they started building a hospital, and it was done in 3 weeks. And there is no hospital in America that would ever be built that fast. And it was all modular. They basically had to clear the site, bring in the modules, connect them together like they're Legos, and they built a hospital in 3 weeks, which is phenomenal. But we're not going to be able to do that. I mean, we can go into the high schools and things like that, but that's not an optimal situation, which is one of the reasons for closing them down. Why else how will this work? How does closing it down work? Well, we're too close right now, by the way. I just want to say that. But
we don't have 6 feet of social
We
distancing.
don't have 6 feet. Is you hold your hand out straight. See, we're just going to show the audience how much in violation. Put your hand towards me, and see we're in violation here. But that's okay. We're going to be really careful. And by the way, I also, in my social distance, I have an obligation here. So let's say I get sick tomorrow. I'm calling you tomorrow, and I'm telling you, hey, I don't feel well. That's part of the whole. So we can be our own epidemiologists. We can be our own public health officers. I deputize you. I deputize everybody in this room to be their own public health officers. You can let people know. And by the way, blame is what I want to say is not a good idea. Blaming, oh yeah, thanks a lot. You infected me with this virus. It happened. Somebody infected me, and somebody infected. But I'd like to trace my steps back and let the people know. So one thing that you can do is you can kind of keep down low too. You can stay in, watch some television, read the Chronicle Telegram, all the things you want to do in your spare time. And then, and not go see your grandmother, because one of the things we know is that that is one particular age group that's not doing well. We know that if this gets into like the nursing homes, once you get into the nursing homes, it's devastating. By the way, we knew that with SARS too. There was a nursing home in Toronto that was basically wiped out. Everybody developed the disease, and everybody had a problem. Everybody died in that, and this is back in 2003. By the way, how did we stop SARS? We did not have a vaccine. I'll talk about vaccines is my business. We did not have one. We did not have one for that. We will not have one for this part of the COVID-19 epidemic. So you best not think about it as we go into the storm. We're heading into a storm for the next, my estimates are month and a half. And we can come out of it if we all try to help each other. So my responsibility is to keep my distance from people, to go back how many days? Well, one thing we learned, there was a New England Journal of Medicine paper very early, like in the middle of January. A bunch of physicians from China got together and started looking at this whole problem, and they realized that people were developing disease within 5 days. So if I go home, my wife is going, and 5 days later, my wife is going to get the disease, and 5 days later, when my son comes home to visit, after that, he'll get the disease. So we know a lot about that. That's one of the things they did in Singapore, was they just went after people. Singapore, by the way, is a great story. They were heavy at the beginning. Singapore got it right. The first 100 cases that they had, they investigated heavily. So they would talk to those people. Where you been? Where were you? Where were you? Who'd you talk to? Who'd you see? And then they went out to that group, and then they went out to that group, and it gets to be a big job. But guess what? Their cases are over. They're done. Like China. China's cases are also There's no new cases. The deaths are trailing off. China has beat this too. South Korea has beat it. Italy has not. Iran is still in the middle of it. We're hoping to be more like, I think the best analogy is we would want to be at this stage. We can't be Singapore. That ship has sailed. It's really kind of too late. But I would say if these precautions work, and if these closures work, we should be more like South Korea, and out of this in a much better way.
Well, what is it about COVID that makes it spread so quickly? And really, what do people need to know about the disease? I know some people compare it to the flu, but it's not the flu. It might have similar symptoms.
While you're on the flu, I'm going to put a little thumbnail in that, because I want to come back to that, because flu is a very big problem. Mm-hmm. It's a very big problem, and it is a very serious problem. Lots and lots and lots and lots of people die from flu, and there are ways we can take care of that. Why is it so infectious? It seems to have a long life, on a shelf life. And one of the things we do with viruses, we paint them on surfaces. We paint them on stainless steel. We paint them on wood. And then we just sit there and wait. And after certain times, we'll take a swab and see if we can get it to grow in the laboratory, like this. And then we try to get it to grow. And then, we had about 50% of the activity after an hour. After 2 hours, we had 25%, and after 3 hours, it was mostly gone. After 3 hours, that is how long it lasts on a surface, and it appears that this might have a longer, like potentially 3 days, which means that I touched that surface, and I eat a potato chip, then I could potentially. This is old. I've spent most of my life working on disease prevention. This is an old story, and you're going to say, "Oh yeah, well that's a great piece of high tech." Wash your hands. Washing your hands. I have spent my entire life developing disease preventions, and some are quite fancy. One of my students over there is working on a very fancy one. And I will tell you this, there is nothing better than soap and water. It covers more diseases. It is, the price is cheap. It's all kinds of good things about washing your hands. And one of the things I tell people, if you touch your face, wash your hands. You can't overwash them. And if you do, you can put some cream on them and keep them soft, and so that they don't get cracks. You don't want dry hands. That's just as bad. And that's one of the best ways you can protect yourselves. I've been doing this for 23 years, and I have rated my students' sneezes. And I think it's kind of embarrassing for them, but this is an epic fail. Achoo. The next best one, a good one, a halfway decent one, is the Dracula sneeze. And the very best one is down the shirt, because that contains it. It gives you that nice warm feeling too, by the way. That contains the whole thing, and it gets it away from anybody else. And then wash your hands after that. And it really works. It is a really, really workable thing. One of the things we've learned from China and from cruise ships, is that contact in a cabin is going to result with 2 people infected. So if you have the capacity to separate people who are infected, that means separated. I saw a very terrible picture, a heartbreaking picture of a woman and her husband of 63 years or something, and
yes.
She's knocking on the window, and he's in the room. I go, oh my God, they've never been away from each other, and here they are. And that was so sad. But that's a good thing. Mike DeWine is going to announce, I think, some new restrictions on nursing homes this weekend. I think he left off on that subject yesterday. Nursing homes are, that's ground zero. That's where we have lots and lots and lots of issues. And I wouldn't be surprised if it got really, really restricted there. This is not forever. This is temporary. And this will pass, and this is something that that we will all get through, and this will pass, and then we'll go back to normal. But when we go back to normal, I am hoping we remember this, because it's very important to remember. And I've been talking to moms and such, and you ever hear of this poem, "Ring Around the Rosie"?
Yes.
Pocket full of posies.
Yes.
Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. It's incredibly dark. And it is a story. It is an oral history. And what it is a thought bomb. And so what is going on is parents are teaching their babies what to teach their babies. And it gets passed on. By the way, there's this disease. You're probably going to have a lot of problems with it, because I can imagine the first time somebody makes the realization that "Ring Around the Rosie," a pocket full of posies, ashes, what did I just, it's about the Black Plague, and about the fact that there were some treatments like pocket full of posies. They used to think that people with petals could sprinkle flower petals and make people better. And that's not, but I do like smells, by the way. I actually like to put scents in soap, and because the thing I like about it is then you have that extra reminder. It's a behavioral thing. That's all. Sometimes I don't think a lot of these scents and essential oils are all that effective, but they are effective in it. Oh yeah, I just washed my hands, and then I know instantly, and I get that reinforcement that I did something. And because I don't know, half the time I do things and I don't even. We touch ourselves on the face and we don't realize it half the time. But I've told my students they need to tell me that when I touch my face. That's something. That's the new rule going forward. And then going forward, also after we get through with this, we have to think about future kinds of issues. We have to think about. Then I think we need to get back to flu. Hundreds of thousands of people's lives could be saved with a universal vaccine for flu. Let me just say that again. Hundreds of thousands of lives could be saved with a universal vaccine for flu. Bill Gates is all in on this subject. We know Bill Gates around here because he's the guy who provided the initial money for our early college here. That many of these students are part of my early scientist program. None of them are here today, by the way. They're on the distance precautions, and so he is very much into this idea. He's actually lectured at Harvard, on this, and because he's a deep thinker, and he's right. A universal vaccine would save hundreds of thousands of lives, because you give a vaccine. Imagine do you get a flu vaccine?
Sure.
I do too. And I asked my students a question. I said, how many of you got a vaccine last year? About 30% of them raised their hand. I said, keep your hands up. And how many of you did it in the last 2 years? More kids raised their hands. After 3 years, the entire class raised their hands. They're not anti-vaxxers. They believe. And if we give them a vaccine that would last for 10 years, we could do a lot of good. We also have to be ready. And I know you're probably short on time, but we also have to be ready for the next wave of this COVID virus. Because if we take care of it by June, there is a potential for a return in next fall. And if that happens, we have to be ready for that. That's where I'm hoping the vaccine comes in. One of the problems that we have with vaccines for these kinds of short-term diseases is that a drug company loses money. If I develop a vaccine and then the epidemic is over, they didn't make their money. But I think we need to pay for that and do that.
Well, my next question is hoping that you can explain, what are some of the symptoms of COVID and really what is a coronavirus?
Well, a coronavirus is, I'll tell you a little story. I was on a mission trip once, and we went to Juarez, Mexico. This was years ago, before they stopped doing those trips. And we were down there to build an orphanage, and there was orphanages there because of the drug problem. The parents got recruited into that industry. So we're building this building for the kids, and it was hot, 105 degrees. So on days where we would, on days that we would have off days, we would play with the kids. So we brought some games with us. And there was a game that we brought with us. I was playing with these 3 little girls. They didn't speak English. I didn't speak Spanish. And the game was called, and I only had boys. I have 2 boys, and I never played the game, Pretty Pretty Princess. So I didn't know how the game worked, but we didn't. They didn't know either, and we figured it out together. And basically, the game, if you don't know it, is about to collect all the bling. So you want to get the earrings, and you want to get the bracelet, the necklace, and all those things. And the pinnacle of the game is to put on the tiara. And these little girls started shouting at me when I put it on, La Corona, La Corona. And I said, well, yes, I'd love a beer. Finally, somebody gets me. Corona means crown. And so when you look at these viruses in an electron microscope, you see that it appears to have a thorny crown. They all appear that way, and that's where the name comes from. We study HIV. HIV is named after is after the host, the disease, and it's also a lentivirus. Lentivirus means that it establishes a long-term infection, and so that's where that name comes from. Now, let me get back to. I told you about 3 different coronaviruses, and 2 of them are from bats in China: SARS and COVID-19. There was a study where a group of scientists went into some caves with a bunch of swabs, and they swabbed bats. And they just would grab them, you swab the bat, and then you take it back. They found 400 coronaviruses. Wow. 400 that aren't the 2 that I just told you. 400 different coronaviruses. So any one of them could have been. And there may be more, and this could happen again. I think it will happen again. We have these spillovers where you have a disease that exists in an animal population. HIV is a disease that existed in an animal population. Ebola is also a bat disease. Exists in the bat disease. The bat doesn't give a crap about it, but the bat poops. And that's it's got Ebola in the poop, the guano. If a piece of fruit rolls across that fruit and somebody grabs that piece of fruit, takes a bite of it, that starts an epidemic. And actually, they were able to figure that out in 2014. So animals are a source of disease, and that can be, and there's more of them out there. There's a lot of them out there.
So what are some of those characteristics of COVID-19?
The characteristics, I got to tell you, symptoms, I tell my students this all the time, symptoms are terrible. And the reason that they're terrible is this. They cross symptoms. Fever, dry cough, low white blood cell count, and I just talked about 5,000 diseases. And they all have the same kinds of symptoms. And then, of course, actual presence of the virus. We right now are looking for the presence of the virus. We need a second test to be able to test for previous episodes with the virus, which is the best way to look for it. Most people, I'll tell you, will not get severely ill from this. Most people will not die from this, but some will. But because of the speed, that's the big deal here. It's because of the way this tsunami, this viral tsunami is coming. That's the problem. If there's some way we can drop the curves a little bit and do that, we're going to be in a lot better shape. That's that flattening of the curve. You talk about flu. Flu is a problem, but flu is kind of constantly in the background, and people die from flu. It is that serious of a disease.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we're missing? Anything else that a viewer should know? Wash your hands
and be good to each other. That's a big deal. I mean, it really is. We all need to be understanding. This is going to be very painful for everybody. I don't like change. I'm an old dude. I don't like change, but you know what? We're going to do this. And remember, it might be unnecessary for you, but you might be doing something very, very good. Your suffering, your trauma, your misery, I'm going to use that word misery, is beneficial to somebody else's life and somebody else's wellness. And I say that's a good thing. That is a good thing to do. So when we wash our hands, you're not just washing your hands for yourself, but for somebody's grandmother. And if we got to keep those grandmothers alive, or we won't get cookies.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And stay tuned for the Chronicle for more coverage on pretty much everything regarding COVID.